Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Beehive and welcome to today's topic, PM 101, preparing for a major project. We're super excited to have you here. I'm here with my colleague, Nick Morosco, and Matt Alex. And Matt, I'm going to turn it over to you for a little primer on SteamYard, which is the application we're currently using and how it works.
Yeah, well, good afternoon. I'm really excited about today's conversation. It's really about preparing for a major project. So there's a couple ways that you could really just interact with us. Definitely in the comment, we'd love for you to just give us some of your thoughts, ideas. You'll see that Gabrielle will be manning the chat and being able to be the voice of the chat, and you'll see the interaction between that. Your comments could be put up on stage, as well as we may invite you up on stage. And if you do want to be invited on stage, go ahead and just let us know in the comments, and we will definitely bring you up. This is being streamed live on YouTube, so this will be available to anyone who missed it, or if you want to come back and revisit it. But we're really excited about the topic. I think it's something that most schools need to be thinking about as we go. So as we go through the conversation, definitely be a part of the voice that comes into here. All right.
Awesome.
All yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Matt. All right. Well, if we could get our slides up, we'll kick this off here. Our project leadership. And we want to just do a little introduction, kind of tying this back to our session last, I would say probably 2 or 3 weeks ago now, our first session, where we talked about who should be brought in to help lead a project, right? What's really interesting here is who is on board. Several attendees doubled down on the need to involve more end users from the beginning, as administrators often aren't aware of operations and processes. This was actually an outcome of a retrospective that was done by Metropolitan State University of Denver, and they've published this on their website recently. And this was a major outcome, which leads back into what we talked about. Leadership really should be agnostic. We should be choosing folks to lead huge efforts like the student information system or ERP implementations, title agnostic, right? Who's the best fit for this? Who has the skill set, the passion, and the knowledge and the drive to push these projects forward? Because we all know none of them are easy, and they're really, really long and with lots of moving parts and pieces. So we just wanted to tie that back to a real life scenario where a school had that particular outcome. And I'm going to push it over to Nick or Matt to see if you guys have any comments on what Metropolitan State University of Denver had to say.
I just think that it's good to see what's out there. I think a lot of times people embark on projects with everything being perfect and ideal. And I think what they're kind of shedding light on is that what everyone has to think about. Hey, these are things that we should have thought about ahead of time. And we're so used to just doing it the way we've always done it, meaning we follow what everyone else is doing. We assume that everything will be okay because someone told us. But we're in a different world that requires us to rethink how we engage with our projects. And I'll be honest, I give it to them for being kind of transparent. Most schools are not transparent. They're afraid to tell people that they might have made a mistake, that maybe it wasn't as good as it goes. This will benefit the Workday ecosystem because now they've given you a little bit of the roadmap that you should think about. Because in there, they talk about the positives that they have found, right? But they want you also to see what could be better. And so maybe the next school that goes through it will shine and be much more effective. And it's a learning experience. We all make mistakes, right? And part of that is that. But kudos to them. So, Nick, thoughts?
Yeah, I'll agree. I think it's great they shared that, and the timing couldn't be better. I'm not sure exactly when it was published, but we found it after we'd already planned to have this conversation. So it just, and maybe as part of our research, we stumbled onto it, but it's just a really great narrative of everything that we want to talk through today and how we want to try to mitigate these same types of issues. Because none of this is a new story for a project. Every project has bits and pieces of these problems. So I look forward to talking through it, and it's a great case study to refer back to. So I agree. Kudos to them for sharing their experience, because I don't think I've ever read an article quite that honest and open about how their experiences were throughout a project.
Are you saying that they didn't purposely put it out right before our session, Nick? Is that what you're saying? They
Not to my awareness. I think that would have been very strategic on my part to hey, but I don't know anybody there unless somebody else does. But no, it was great timing, and like I said, it couldn't have been any better of a read to validate the conversation we want to have.
Yeah, absolutely. And Arthur, Art, I think it looks like in the chat you go by. It's nice to meet you. I think you're absolutely right, and that goes to what we really want to talk about here today. We at Beyond have a process that I think you've all read. Matt has written articles regularly about this process. And we typically talk about it in the context of organizational, institutional change, and sort of a look back at where have we come from and where do we want to go. But as Nick and I were talking about this session and working through what we really wanted to dive into, we recognize that process that we already have in place also works when you have started a project, right? So it's never too late to evaluate where you are in a process. So to kick this off, I'm going to kick it over to you, Matt, to really talk about our P3S2 process. And then we're going to go into how you can utilize this not only to prepare for a huge implementation, but also how you can use it throughout an existing implementation.
Yeah. And I appreciate, the ability to have a conversation about P3S2. P3S2 is just, it's people, process, procedure, system, and structure, right? When we think about implementations right now, we look at requirements. What do we do today? How is things need to be put into the new system? Well, when you do that, you're just going to lift and shift yourself into it. And in many cases, you are probably even going to set yourself up for failure because you don't really get anything out of it. So when we think about P3S2, it is really an organizational mind shift in thinking about what are the procedures, what are the policies. Because remember, a lot of the things that we do today were inherited from the 1990s when we didn't have technology. So this is probably a prime time. And when we were doing our prep, Liz kind of made the conversation about why are some of the things so complex? Why does a student need to know 14 different things or different points or different policies or different rules? The reason a lot of those rules and policies are in place is because that's what humans had to do to manage certain things. But yet technology today allows you to do that in the background. So we should make things much more effective. Hence, we got to look at policy and procedures to do that, right? And so that's going to be a big part. Of course, people is a big part. Beyond is built around speaking about people being the driver of the transformation. It isn't the technology. You could put all the technology in the world, but unless you have the people with the mindset to transform your campus, you won't get very far. And of course, everything we're trying to do is putting in systems, but really, what is the structure of your campus? What do you have to think about, thinking about what you have to do to really transform, and what structures are there? And systems isn't just one system anymore. It's multiple systems. It's the ability to have layers, a system of record, a system of engagement, system of experience, and then just think about the way that we communicate in our own daily life. All those are really a big part of it. And you have to think about those in your project plan to be really successful as you go forward.
Absolutely. And Nick, just when thinking of process and procedure, right? Is that something you should, if you're in a 3-year project and you've determined what you want your process and procedure to be, should that remain static throughout that project, or should you be able to shift and reevaluate during the project so that you go live with exactly what you need at that moment?
Yeah, absolutely. You need to reevaluate throughout the duration. So many decisions and plans are made even 4 or 5 years before before an implementation. So call it a 3-year project, but it's 5 years of actual thinking through it. The world changes a lot in 5 years, a lot in 2 years. So to not have something built into the life cycle of the project where you can respond to whatever the change is, you know, the most dramatic we all remember is COVID, right? It did everything, but every project has something, rarely to that scale, but there's always something or several somethings you have to account for, and to not build in some time for that and think through that as you're resourcing the project. It's all but a guarantee. We just don't know exactly what that moment is going to be and when exactly it's going to occur on a project. But definitely have to keep evaluating.
Yeah, that's a perfect point. And that's why we really want to discuss this today, right? We all know that we have to make sure that we do these things long before the project starts, long before we go out for an RFP. We need to know what our business is and where our business is going. And we want to take a look at all of these things. But let's pretend that this project started, right? And we have to begin to evaluate. So I want to hear from the audience in the chat, or you can ask in the chat to come on stage if you'd like. But what I want to really hear from folks is, when we kick off a project, right, and we start to plan for this project, what's the time frame, if you've been involved in a large scale project, what time frame was given for kicking off these projects and really planning for it? And were there enough people involved? I'd love to hear from you guys. Anybody want to come up on stage and talk about this?
You know, I think it's always been set up as, what is the timeline to go live? Mm-hmm. I think that is one of the big things that I think most people struggle with, is that it isn't even what is the timeline to start, it's the timeline to go live. And right. So everything comes back from that. And of course, the reality of it is, you shouldn't have started when you needed to start, because you didn't do the things that need to get done to be prepared to take on a major project. I mean, when you're doing HR, finance, or student, you are doing open heart surgery in a lot of ways. You wouldn't just start an open heart surgery by getting into the hospital and say, yeah, let's get going. No. There's things that you have to do before that surgery. Your doctor has to look at your vitals, has to look at your ability to go through that. And I don't think schools do that. They just walk in and say, I need the heart surgery, and let's put it in here, open me up, let's go. And so their timeline is the go live. And that go live could be an admissions period, or financial aid packaging needs to happen. So they'll kick it off at that moment in time, right? So those are the things that we're really seeing. So
yeah, and I think I see in the comments here, we got a couple things. I think this app says it really well. You know, RFPs and implementations, too often they're mixed and they become one thing, right? So, you know, you have an RFP and then all of a sudden you initiate an implementation, right? And that needs to be separated, and we need to give ourselves plenty of time to initiate a project kickoff. And that's where the people, process, procedures, systems, and structures comes into play. We need to make sure that we've given ourselves enough time to ask some really hard questions, right? So does anybody want to put any comments in the chat, or again, come up on stage? You know, what does process improvement mean, right? Like, if we can't even define what process improvement means, and Nick, maybe you can take it while we get some comments, but as an organization, as an institution, what do we mean by process improvement? And how do we then generalize that and get that out to the whole entire community so that we have the buy-in we need to actually exact change? So do you want to kick it off?
Really quick, before you go to that, I think Maureen put a comment on here in terms of, you know, are we including the lift and shift for the infrastructure and the hosting element? Because remember, there's a whole tech side of it that needs to be prepared too, right? So when you do that lift and shift in an infrastructure, there is a set of activities that go beyond the people element of it, right? I think, and Maureen, definitely jump in, and if you want to join us, you know, join us on stage. But I do think there is preparation on both ends of this as you go through that process. So yeah, I just wanted to tackle that really quick before we went through that, and definitely invite others to join the the studio if they like to come up. So.
Yeah, Matt, I like your focus on Maureen's comment there. Infrastructure, lift and shift. Earlier this week, you had some conversation on your, what is it, the Mondays with Matt about plumbing. So I've been thinking about the plumbing example of these projects. And, sometimes you just have to replace the pipes. Sometimes you are remodeling the whole bathroom. So to expand on that analogy, there is an infrastructure piece of these projects that it's not glamorous. It has to be there. It has to work. And nobody ever sees if it does work, great. If it doesn't work, everybody knows it. But, no one sees the work that went into making it do everything it's expected to do. So tying that to the process improvement questions and kind of thought process, sometimes you just have to replace your plumbing because it's leaking. And that is your improvement, and for the right project, that may be enough right now for this project today. But then what about your true process improvement? How are we gaining efficiencies, experiences for students, staff, applicants, et cetera? So to me, the concept of even really as you're evaluating process improvement, it's which processes are really on the table to be discussed for improvement right now based on whatever constraints you have at your institution. Sometimes it's budget, sometimes it's staffing, could be the plumbing and the technology just needs replaced first. So really having that roadmap helps start the conversations to really drive what processes you're improving. And I do find it important to be very clear with all of your stakeholders that this is like that finite set of processes we're focused on today, and then here's where we're going to go tomorrow and the year after that.
Yeah, and Nick, I see that Maureen joined. I don't know if Maureen, you're on. Let's see if she can come on stage. Maureen, are you available?
Okay, here I am.
There you go. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Yeah, I asked that question because I'm preparing for a discovery on getting some RFP for a lift and shift of our 3 PeopleSoft applications to a hosted solution with possible managed services. So and we're not starting that discovery until January, but prior to that, I'm doing some research. Hence why I'm on here, and I am talking to different people, finding out what they're doing to come up with a list of questions that, so here we are on campus, we have a lot of integrations, right? That's my biggest concern. Well, how do we shift into another space and integrate back to critical systems that need data from those systems? So those are the reasons why I joined, just to see what's going on. And I do understand there's, obviously the SaaS part of it, which is mostly the discussion, but being the infrastructure part is really my project that I need to get some information so I can inform people and the project sponsor. So I'm responsible for making sure this happens. So yeah, that's why I put the question out there.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. And while we do focus on cloud, and it's on any major project, I think one of the things that we're trying to do in having these conversations in the Beehive is for people to think about holistically the transformation. It isn't just the actual activities, but how do you prepare a campus? The one difference about most campuses is that you have a set of schools that are dynamic. You have deans and you have faculty, but you have students. But then you have to think about the registrar's office and the HR department. You have all these complex type of personalities that have to be a part of this conversation. So when you do, even in an infrastructure model, you're going to need to have other people be in the discussion. It isn't just the IT shop. It's like, hey, how much data do we convert? How much, infrastructure do we want? Is downtime need? Can this downtime work? Right. So it's a holistic element of it that's really important. And I think planning all projects with a forefront mindset is going to be really important. I saw Ryan Myers put something out there in terms of a CRM, and Ryan certainly joined us. I think it's really important that it isn't just the outcome, but how do we get to the right outcome? And then also, Maureen, you got to think about how does it play when you do decide to move to a platform that might be more SaaS in the future, right? So there's a little bit of preparation that needs to go there too, right? So it isn't just the project today, it's setting you up for success. And Maureen is from Northwestern. I know Maureen, so that's why I can say that. And I think it's important for people to realize that you need to have thought leaders that are doing what you're doing to be successful, but to be really thoughtful as you go through that process.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely the infrastructure part, knowing though that we also have like file servers that serve up data for the community. And we have file servers that serve up data for vendors. We also have point-to-point services. We have other services that we have to be concerned about. Our data warehouse, they're very concerned, So we're doing this conversation right now with everybody to find out what are their concerns, what questions do they have. But the part that hasn't happened yet and we'll need to do is, hey, community, meaning departments, this is our plan. This is how it might impact you. Can we talk about the partnership that we need to have, and they'll be at the table. So it's really a mini journey towards the SaaS cloud, because they all know about SaaS and the cloud and the discussions we've been having. The reason we're doing this is that we've been kicking the can down the road around the SaaS part, and so we're like setting ourselves up for that future, as you said. But there's some benefits that we want to obtain from this about, security, disaster recovery, all those types of things that plague us today, and trying to figure out how to make that work. So I just have lots of questions right now, which is fine.
Yeah, and I worked with a client in a completely different capacity, but they had just moved to PeopleSoft SaaS, right? And what was really, really interesting is it was part of a larger organizational, 5-year innovation plan.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
And so it took a tremendous amount of change management, right? That's the other piece that's really, really difficult. And a lot of people don't want to invest in is change management. You can
100%.
You can document everything you want and all of your outcomes, but if you don't have a good change management plan, it could all be for naught. And so I think what was really interesting about what they did, and don't get me wrong, I showed up a year later to implement something else, and they were still struggling with the fact that they had moved to SaaS and didn't have that control that they typically had with on-prem, right? And so they took the opportunity to actually strip back all the customizations they had done in their PeopleSoft system for 10, 15 years before that. And it was really interesting because they had bought into it. So by the time we showed up, they didn't want to do any workarounds. They wanted to implement the product as is. They wanted to make sure that they didn't customize it. We just went through this effort to de-customize our system. Let's not go and start doing that again. And I thought it was really, really cool that they had all bought into that. They all sat around the table and kept reminding each other of that. But that, to me, I think had taken a tremendous amount of effort and change management over the 3 years before I even got there. And so if I can tell you anything, I would say, do all the research you can, do all the mapping exercises that you can, all of the, hey, it exists here today. We need a different type of data warehouse, or we need different capabilities in our data warehouse in the future, showing the departments that they can still get where they need to go, but also making sure that change management comes along so that it is actually successful.
I'm glad this is recorded, because I'll be sharing it with the project team about change management. Because that's just the drumbeat that without that, we're going to have so much gap.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you almost institutionally need to own that change management, right? Mm-hmm. You have to bring in the people who know Northwestern. They know how you guys speak, your tone, your language of IT, how the departments work. You need to bring someone in who really, truly knows and understands that and can put a plan together for you that is going to be super successful. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a few comments. I'm trying to keep up. You all are very active in the chat here today. But Jeff had mentioned knowing your outcomes and what you want to achieve for data systems, process, and experience. That is part of that pre-planning exercise that it sounds like you're talking through now. And will help define the success of a project like an infrastructure project. You know, it could be a small scope, it could be massive, you could be trying to scale back customizations like Liz talked about. All of those are viable options, but you want to get all that on the table before you even start the project. That every project has a planning phase, but it's always after the project started. That pre-planning, what is our primary goal, what are our objectives, what defines success? These are all the kinds of questions that having those answers before you ever set foot on, you know, official project meetings, that's what's going to help drive those conversations and really keep folks focused across a large project team.
Yeah, I think the other piece I would say too is just making sure, and I think a lot of people have in different ways been putting this in the comments, is making sure the right people are in the room to have those conversations. So it's one thing to bring in a head of a department. It's another thing to bring in the folks that are actually running those reports on a daily basis to provide to the head of the department, right? So let's take history, for example. You know, it's one thing to bring the chair of the history department in and say, hey, you know, what do you need from the data warehouse? What's the data you're regularly looking at? It's another thing to go find the person that is always pulling the reports for that person and writing the reports for that person and providing that data to them. You need to make sure that person joins them in the room so that you actually get the information that you're looking for and you're not wasting time, right? And so this is where we went to with our last meeting. You don't always have to have the folks with the largest title in the room. You sometimes need to go down 1 or 2 levels, if not more, to actually get to the heart of what it is you're trying to answer, the question you're trying to answer. And so if we go back, what is process improvement, right? Process improvement to executive leadership is going to look completely different than process improvement to an assistant director of financial aid or a senior director of enrollment management, right? It's going to look completely different to somebody working in advising than it does to the dean of the college. And so we have to make sure that we're asking that question of all constituents on campus and not just sitting in a boardroom asking that question and then trying to then get buy-in from folks. Does anybody have any comments on any of our conversations so far? Want to come up on stage and share with us your thoughts? Have you ever hit roadblocks? And
we have a shy group that doesn't want to come on stage. They don't want to put their camera on. But a lot of them are in our comments are blowing up. So that's why we're throwing it in. So one, we want to say thank you for all the folks that are just putting in the comments. I think those are really big drivers for the conversation we're having today. But your voice matters, so we'd love for you to join us on the stage. So if you got an invitation or if you want to be invited, just join us, and we can definitely talk through some of the conversations. But and I see Ryan Myers is on there, and he's talking about the changes that he's doing, and Ryan is from University of Texas, Dallas. So I think he's seasoned, right? He's gone through he probably has enough floor burns from all the implementations and support mechanisms he has to have put in through the years to understand it. And part of what we're trying to do here is we're trying to shape a framework that you'll be successful in no matter what you're going to do, whether you use our Beyond or you use another firm or you just go internally. A lot of what you're going to be doing is going to be driven by how well you plan it and realizing what the outcome is that's going to be there. So,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we want to. So, Nick, do you want to? We've worked on a lot of projects. I think over our time, you've worked on multiple different type of projects. Do you want to kind of take any best practices here for some of this process improvement? How do you start measuring volumes? How do you execute other metrics? Like, how do you start even getting through that stuff?
You said volumes. That's one of my favorite questions. I can't count how many projects I've been on where you get to the 11th hour and it's like, how many of this particular transaction do we run on a day, a week, a month? And the old system, the legacy system either didn't track it well or the folks that know how to report on it aren't available and we can't get that data. So one of the early recommendations to start, you can start it in a pre-planning phase. You can start it, at the very beginning of a project. You start measuring some of these transactional volumes, processing times. How long does it take to end-to-end process a applicant or do a grade change, or pick whatever processes you're improving and start measuring today. It's never too late to start measuring now, but you are going to want that data down the road to have something to compare back to. And time and time again, I'm surprised at how hard it is to get to those metrics when you're really looking backwards if you aren't starting to measure them, today with the folks who are actually doing these things. So that's one of my biggest recommendations, and really use some of that to decide how to prioritize, because you can't always fix everything all at once, but you can certainly prioritize the things that are the most painful, take the longest, require the most resources, etc.
I pulled Jeff up, and Jeff, would love your
Hi,
thoughts
everyone.
on what Nick was just chiming through, or I know you've been talking about it in comments, so you can do either one. So.
Oh, hi. Hi, everyone. I'm just sitting on my front porch. Great conversation. Yeah, I think one of the things that gets you in planning is the amount of effort that goes into planning for an entire ecosystem. So in my experience, we've dealt with mainly student systems, and very often like the subsystems around things like D2L or Slate or whatever, the improvements in the process and the resources required to make the changes that you need there, it's kind of an afterthought in a lot of times, and can really bite you in the end, because all of a sudden you realize the impacts that flow across all the systems, and you're kind of scrambling with either resources to help you in those areas, or figuring out what those improvements are and the downstream impacts and how the data flows between the systems. It can really get you if you don't spend enough time up front understanding the outcome that you want to achieve, first of all, and the experience that you're trying to achieve, but also what is the impact and the changes that you need to make to some of those subsystems. So
Jeff, why do you think schools don't do this work ahead of time? Like defining what the outcome is. I know why they don't do change management, because they believe they could do it themselves, and they also think it's not as important because we'll get people to change. That's an easy thing, but the reality of it is change is actually more harder than actually putting the software in, right? For me, software is the easy part. Configuring and designing and converting, those are like, black and white kind of things. But man, when I have to explain to the advisor that you have to use this type of methodology to identify the student, that's a different thought. Why do you think schools, and you've been through them, don't focus on outcomes, and they don't focus on the change to those outcomes?
I think people look at it in reverse order. So you say it a lot, Matt, in your discussions, that it's often looked at as a technology lift and shift, right? And so they get the demos, they see the software, and they're thinking of it from a software perspective instead of really thinking through outcomes. Like, how do we make changes to critical business processes and make them, simplify them? What is it we really want to achieve? And getting your stakeholder community to really be thinking that way, because the software is going to handle what you need to do. It's really less about the software. And I think getting out of that mind space and thinking, okay, let's think about the experience. What if I had to, be a student handling this one process and how painful it is? And let's look at that and how can we make that improvement? So I think that's one of the core problems, especially in the last, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I haven't seen anybody really look at it in a way that makes it clear that we're trying to get the outcomes. They expect that the outcomes will just flow out of implementing the new software, which isn't the case. There's not really the time once you're into the heat of the implementation of the technology to start to say, oh boy, we could probably make an improvement here. I think that's kind of the problem.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up these auxiliary systems, right? You might be replacing an SIS, but you can't lose sight of all these auxiliary systems, because that's the one thing. Nick and I are working with a client right now, and I walked into a meeting, and it was tough. It took them a little while, but I was like, let's pretend we're staying with this system. If we're going to stay with this system, what do you need from this system? How does it need to operate to be the most optimal for you? And then what does that integration look like to this new SIS? Let's not pretend it's going to go away and this new SIS is going to make our lives easy. Let's look at this here today. So I'm glad you brought that up, because people lose sight of all of that. Housing, parking, insurance, the health center, right? All of these folks have their own systems that don't have anything to do with the SIS.
Liz, look, we got a party. You asked for a party on stage,
I like it.
and all of them jumped on at the same time
Yep.
to have a party on stage. So I'm gonna
Fantastic.
throw it to Ryan first. And Ryan, I'd like to ask that same question to you that I asked Jeff. And you're at a campus, right? So you are, and you also were an implementer. You consulted, just like I did years ago. Why do you think they're not looking at outcomes? They're just looking at requirements. And why is change so hard for them to invest in?
Well, I think from our side, for one thing, we're slowly starting to make that shift to more of an outcome focus. It took forever. You have, at least in our institution, there's a lot of independence among the colleges that folks really leaned into. And so when we're asking these questions about what's in the best interest of the university as a whole, getting them to kind of shift that mindset has definitely taken a lot of work. But we're slowly starting to get there. I think the resistance to it just comes from, a lot of it's just plain fear of change. What I've been doing works for me.
Yeah.
Why in the world do I want to spend time learning a different way to do something? And Matt, you and I have seen that over the years too. I've had people, when we've done implementation, quit 6 months after it's gone live because, like, I just don't want to do this anymore. I've been doing this for 30 plus years and I don't want to play with this new toy, so I'm gone. And when you talk about outcomes, you talk about these projects, you have to accept that that's a possibility and be okay with it. And I think our leadership, again, it's taking us a while, and we've had a lot of turnover, which I think actually has helped us. A lot of the old school mentality has kind of retired off for us. And so we've got a new breed of leaders coming in saying, look, we need to start looking at this from a wider lens than we ever have before, especially if we're going to deal with the enrollment challenges we're all going to be facing. We're going to deal with the student success challenges we're all going to be facing. We either get in front of it now or get run over by it later. And that mentality shift has been huge in helping us do a lot of things on our campus. You
used the word independence, and I kind of want to, and I'm going to take this off a little bit because we have both Jerry and Art here, and I think they can lend a little conversation around. Independence means, historically, the reason we've always struggled to put change on campus, because they all believe what they do inside of the back office is so unique that nobody else can do it. And if they change it, all of a sudden their brand or their way of serving their students, which is so different than everyone else, is going to be impact their rankings and everything else, right? Whatever the reason is. So we've always kind of tried to shake them into saying, look, you're Ivy, but you enroll the same way as my community college. Hey, community college, you enroll the same way at the state, right? There is a little bit of this unique, I do it differently. The other element is the personalization of it. And I'm now going to say something that I think I believe AI is going to allow you to be unique, even in the back office, the way you want to be now. And I think you could become personalized. And in both cases, I think that could happen in the next 5 years, where you want to be unique, you could be unique. Why? Because 10 terabytes per second is being processed on your systems with AI. So you know what? If you want to have a process that makes you juggle through this thing, it could do it in seconds. Your students won't know, but it will allow you to do it. So I think there is going to be this shift, but you have to think about what it is that is making you unique. Why do you need 5 rules to do something in that sense? Art and Jerry, I'd love your take on that, or Ryan, if you want to chime in, you can take it from there, and then we can go
from my perspective, looking in higher education and how people behave when they're going through periods of change, is that a lot of it is protectionism. That they, oftentimes it's the mis-selling of a project by upper administration. We're going to be able to cut costs and so on and so forth. And, you know, potentially we won't need these people and whatnot. And so it leaves people nervous. And so they're going to do anything they can in a lot of instances to go and protect their space. So that's one of the things that I think I've seen over the course of time. And I remember, and Jerry and I did a lot of time together, although he probably deeply regrets it, during the PeopleSoft implementation up in Maryland. And I had one school president in Maryland who the school and he shall remain nameless. I walk into the president and we're having a meeting about the upcoming implementation of PeopleSoft. And the guy asked me, well, how long is this project going to take? And I said, well, you know, it could take a year to 2 years. It just, you know, kind of depends on how we go and scope it out and everything else. And he says, well, that wasn't what I was thinking. I was thinking more along the lines of 3 months. And so I went and I said, well, and I couldn't get the guy to alter his mind. So I said, I honestly cannot be the project manager for this because it's going to fail. I said, unless you have all of the programs that PeopleSoft embeds in their test instances for everything, you know, you have a PhD in nuclear science or whatever it happens to be, it's not going to work that way. It's not like putting a disk into your computer for Microsoft. And so I left, and about 3 months later, I get called back to that school. And of course, it was an utter failure, and they had financial aid lines down around the block pretty much, and came in and took a more sensible approach. So there's a lot of factors in it, but the initial one I think is a critical one, and that's the protectionism, and that's why we've all had these walls around various units and everything else in the past. Is this is my knowledge, and I want it this way, and I don't want it to move forward.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I feel like I worked in higher ed at multiple institutions for over 20 years. And this is why I'm always harping on why are we going to people in executive leadership to answer and ask these questions? I think most of us know that presidents are either brought in to save an institution or to run a campaign for 10 years and, you know, make as much money for the endowment as possible, right? Not necessarily brought in to make critical decisions about systems and structures within the institution. And so I think if we need to design processes where we are bringing in the folks that actually are the boots on the ground, and we need to refocus on the student, right? As an administrator in the background, I could have done my job in financial aid or in student accounts on a spreadsheet, right? Like that, easy enough. Like I could have built some calculators and spreadsheets and done my job that way. So why are we focusing on whether I'm happy or not with the SIS, right? We need to focus on whether or not the student is seeing the information, has the help text that they need, has the context that they need, is getting everything from a single login that they need to easily and seamlessly move through their experience at the institution, and also get the help. And I think that's where we have to start reframing these conversations before the system integration, right?
How many projects have you ever seen, especially let's say an ERP SIS implementation, where students were actually involved in the process?
Yeah, very few.
I can count on one finger.
Yeah. Well, and I always desperately, every project I ran, I was like, do you have work study students? Can we bring them in? Like, can you make them part of this? And, you always get the, it's sort of that legal, FERPA. Well, let me bring up something legal that can block from being creative and actually doing this, right?
We have Jerry's been patiently waiting.
Jerry's been quiet
for Art to give us his dissertation on all this stuff. So Jerry, because you have worked with Art, give us your nuggets on it. No history of how Art worked with you, but
it wasn't.
You don't have enough time for all that.
It wasn't all that. But before that, to say hi to Maureen from Northwestern. She and I were on the PeopleSoft Hug board together long ago. I'm grayer now, but she may remember me. But
there you go. There you go.
So, you know, I don't know that it's interesting. You know, Art said something about, you know, territoriality, and there are probably some of that, but I think it's you know, they don't, you know, a lot of folks don't know what they don't know, and that comes back to change management. They don't even, you know, they have things that they don't like, but they haven't sat down and systematically decided or at least identified what it is that they want to accomplish. You know, it's you know, it's funny. You know, Art and I worked together long ago on PeopleSoft. I recently was a part of a consortial Workday project here in Maryland, and 5 of the schools went live last week on HR and finance on Workday. Originally, there were 6 schools, mine included. I was CIO at one of the other institutions, and it was interesting. We talked for a year among CIOs only about what we wanted in a product. We looked at demos. We brought people in, you know, users. They looked at it. They kind of said, well, yeah, I kind of like this, or that kind of like that, or this kind of looks good. I guess what I think is needed now is somebody other than the CIO to be tasked with getting their arms around this for the institution. It can't be a vendor. A vendor plays a role for sure, a big role, and they could do some of the legwork. A president, you know, you think, well, if we can get the president on board to do this pre-work, then, you know, maybe it'll happen. But honestly, the president, this isn't a path they go down. You know, they want to get a project done. They want it to be successful. They want to do it in the most cost-effective way possible. They want to be written up in a magazine saying that they did a great job and the school did a great job. And that's the ultimate success of everything. But a CIO isn't necessarily the right person, but I can tell you in every campus I've been on, the president looks oddly to the CIO to guide the decision. And so it becomes more of a series of demos that leads into a decision that leads into the selection of an implementation partner who then struggles with the goals, because they're trying to do the pre-work that wasn't done in the beginning, but they're also, the clock is ticking. You know, they you know, they're business. You know, they want to get in, get it done, get out, and have a success. And so yeah, the work is somewhat misplaced. I you know, I guess in couple last thoughts. I think that there needs to be an education of maybe CFOs or CIOs or some sort of collective administrative, high-level administrative group, so that they understand what the process should be. They don't necessarily have to do it. Somebody else can do it, but they need to understand what it is, because ultimately they're the ones signing on the dotted line. And I think as far as change is concerned, you know, I agree totally. I mean, I know where you guys come from. I think I agree totally that your objectives and goals should be established up front, so you know you've met them or not met them. But I also think that going forward in tough times, you know, in terms of hiring the right people, you know, hiring is tough, you know, everywhere. But hiring the people that need to lead these types of projects at the campus level is even harder. And I think to some extent, I was having a call the other day with a vendor, and I was saying, you know, wouldn't it be great if AI could build degree audit and advisement based on the curriculum, so that you didn't have to have somebody do that? Because that's something that has high value that very few schools do well. But it you know, it feeds right into degree completion. You know, just the whole relationship with students. And that's just one example, but I don't know. Those are just sort of some thoughts, but I think that for the most part, the institution at a high level needs to get an education on how the project should run. It seems like what I'm hearing is well, who should we talk to, and that varies by school. I think it's
So Jerry,
I'm wondering,
I-
Matt, before you go on, if you don't mind, please, just a question. How many people have dealt with schools that actually have their project management office outside of IT?
I've never been on a campus that had a project management office.
We do have some, but they definitely live in IT. And I guess
Lydia raised her hand though. Lydia, you said you do, right?
Yeah, we've had both. We've had them in IT and we've had them outside IT, and so we've moved them back into IT. But as I'm listening to the conversation, I think so for me, I know that William's in there saying, he likes change and change is easy, and I have to disagree with that. I think change is really hard, especially when you're in the background and you know what the setup is and you know the realization of the request. And how hard it's really going to be, and the push is, oh, this is easy, just make it happen. I've actually had people tell me, oh, well, there can't be that much logic, it's just a checkbox, just to realize later that you're running some type of systematic change on the system that is just huge. And so when it comes to project management, and I tell this to my team all the time, it really starts with some of the small stuff that we do. When we think about project management, it's usually these big projects, and that's where the project lands. But we have to be thinking about that in the small stuff too, that you actually have a plan and that you're thinking about all of the impacts that plan is going to have on all of the things that your system is touching. Was it Jerry that just mentioned about the degree, having some type of way to actually build that curriculum? That would be a dream come true. But in order to do that, you actually have to get buy-in from the colleges to align their curriculum changes in a strategic way that is streamlined, so that when those changes come through, the system knows how to deal with all of those anomalies or what if scenarios that are going to come up. When you don't have that change management in place, it's really hard to ensure that you're capturing all of the pieces, because they might be different for one department. It's not even at a college level, right? It's like a department could have their curriculum structured in such a way that it's so complex that whatever system you built couldn't accommodate for it. And so it comes back to that planning piece, which I think easily gets overlooked, because they are trying to affect change and make things better, but it's on a high level. What if we did this? What if this change happened? And that all sounds great, but it's not down into the details of what that change could look like.
I think that's I think it's a good point, Lydia. And I have a kind of a little bit of a controversial question, I guess. Did we, it's like in parenting when I'm like, I hate that my kid does this, but I'm like, oh shoot, it's probably my fault that she does it, right? Because I did something. So did we, over the last 20, 30 years, by saying IT owns this, IT owns this, we own this system, we own this process, we own this logic, did we actually take responsibility off all of these other offices around the campus to own what it is they're asking for and what it is they're doing? We took it away from them, right? So now they are at 50,000 feet. They have zero ownership of it because they don't think they own the system. IT owns the system. So why do I have to know and understand all the logic? Just, Lydia, go make this work for me, right?
See, I don't think we necessarily took them off the hook. I think we gave them a nice scapegoat. I think that's what I've noticed is IT becomes a very convenient target for, well, I wish I could do it this way, but those gosh darn IT people just won't only do it because their system won't allow it kind of stuff. And so it allowed them to probably kick down the road conversations that they really should have been having 5-10 years ago.
And I think it's also workload, right? So if we in IT provide a service or a solution that makes life easier, right, for the requester, they're going to come back to me and they're going to say, hey, Lydia, you did this for me last time. Can you do this on this? And so they're looking at ways to make things more efficient for themselves. And um, you guys keep saying this, and I think it's important, is yes, we want to help the department because ultimately it helps, or the college because it ultimately helps the student, but are we really looking at it from the lens of the student? Is the change that we're making really for the benefit of the student or just the department? And I think those are important questions. And when you're dealing with change management, if you're doing effective change management, you're going to be asking these questions up front. And sometimes there's a fear of implementing that change management because there is no change management department or structure in place.
You know, it's something that you and Liz both kind of mentioned earlier. I remember when CRM first came into the higher ed space, the outrage that was expressed, the notion of commoditizing education. But once folks started to realize that our students really are our customers, that's when you start to see a positive shift in how these questions are asked and how they're responded to. It's taken several years to get there, and it's still got a ways to go. But if you're not putting your students at the forefront, you're always going to be setting yourselves up to fail at some point.
One other quick thing on that, you know, I agree with that, but I think to the point of looking to IT, I've been a registrar like in my first life, and you know, back in those days before there was ERP, people worked 100% in their own silos. To a large extent, they still do. The only unifying force is IT. And I say force, it's the enabler, but you know, they don't have the expertise in all the areas either, but they're the only thing that's common between all of the end users. So I think what's being talked about is, to some extent, is a comprehensive curriculum management process that particularly in admissions registrar and a number of other places, but that doesn't exist on a lot of campuses. You have curriculum that's done, you know, within schools, or maybe there's a university curriculum committee or something. But how do you get from a committee decision to implementation? And I actually, in one school, I actually forced myself into that role. The provost wanted me to somehow figure out the curriculum and make it work within a system. And I said, well, I can't do that unless I'm in the conversation. Every conversation about every change they might want to make, and I don't necessarily have to sign off on it, but I have to operationalize it and explain how that could work, might work, or won't work within the context of our systems. And you know, I happen to be a registrar doing that, but I had been around a while and I kind of knew how the institution worked. But
so yeah, we're about 2 minutes away, and Liz, I know Liz had a lot of stuff to cover. So maybe Liz, we may have to defer some of that to the next conversation.
Absolutely.
But I was going to show something, and then Art took production rights and told me that
I'm sorry that
had to do other things. But this is really interesting, and I wasn't planning to show it today. It wasn't part of our thing, but it was going to become a post in the next couple of days. So you guys are going to get a preview of that, and it hits what Jerry said. Jerry said everyone is focused on getting something done at a period of time and so forth, and it's really about refocusing on the direction of your campus, of your project, as opposed to the speed of your project. And so this is actually going to be a post that will come up in the next couple of days. But this is the reality. You guys all see it. See, a lot of things that we say at Beyond is really obvious, but nobody else is saying it. Maybe you guys are saying it, but not saying it the way that we're saying it visually. But I wanted us to, think through that a little bit. I just wanted to show you that as you went, because Jerry, thanks for giving me the plug to showcase it right now. But I do believe higher ed, because they don't plan, they're off and running. They're in speed mode. Yeah. If you were to plan it, your direction, your outcome, your strategy, your alignment has to be done first. That's where the focus has not been, right? And so I just wanted to give that as a nugget as we go into our next session next month. But I wanted us to just tackle that as we think about that as we go forward. So Liz,
Yeah, and I agree. We can keep this conversation going. Our next session actually is focusing on what are the key characteristics of folks that you should bring in to lead a project, right? So maybe you're on a project and you're asked to have, all right, I need a leader for financial aid, registrar's office, advising, student finance. I need leads for all of that, or HR, finance, payroll. Give me a lead. Give me somebody who can own this particular work stream, right? And so, what are the characteristics of those folks who are best equipped to lead that? And again, I will keep harping on this: is that might not be the person with the director title, right? Their skill set may be really good at what it is that they do on a daily basis. It may not translate to a 1, 2, 3 year project, right? They might not have the most innovative mindset. So how do you choose those people? And I think that ties into continuing this conversation of how do we empower people outside of IT to take responsibility for the systems that they use on a daily basis to execute their job and to provide a service to their students. So.
Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you. And we're at time, and we are trying to keep it to an hour. I want to say thanks to both Liz and Nick for really, bringing this kind of conversation up and being able to present it to the market in a way that allows for people to think through this. I, of course, want to thank all of the folks that stepped on stage and willing to give your voice to the conversation. I really believe your voice matters. Higher ed is in a different world, and we have to work collectively as we move forward. So that's really important. And of course, the folks in the comments, we're reading it, we see it. We want to say thank you for being a part of that. Of course, Gabrielle, helping us with voice of the chat, and Ro working on the back around the banners. So, well, I want to say thank you to everyone. Liz, I'm going to let you close it out. And I definitely want to say again, thank you to the folks that stepped on stage.
Yeah, I mean, I'll keep pitching. This is a pretty long series. So again, part 2, we'll talk about the personas. Who do we bring in to actually lead parts of these projects? We're also going to talk about staffing. I know that was a huge resource allocation, huge part of it. We'll have a conversation about staffing, resourcing, backfill strategy. And then we want to talk about how do you actually execute institutional planning? How do you figure out what your institution's calendar is? And I don't mean the one that you post on the website that says this semester starts here and we go on break here. And then system of record planning, which we brought up today. I think Jeff brought that up. All of those auxiliary systems, and how do we bring all of them online as we move through a project? So really, really excited for these upcoming conversations, and thank you all for joining us.